Good evening. I'm Marvin Nesbitt, and I'm here tonight for hosting our final segment in the series on breast cancer awareness. We at LCTV are very proud to have provided the range of speakers and topics during this week. This particular segment, it's one of my favorites simply because we're going to hear from the survivors themselves. It should be in the survivor stories are arranged just to show you the variability and the deadliness of breast cancer. So with that, I'll introduce our very first speaker. Her name is Marcia, otherwise known as MASH.
Hi, my name is MASH, and I'm here to tell you my story of breast cancer. My story has a couple of prologues, however. In 1984, my sister at age 30 was diagnosed with breast cancer. In 1991, my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer. So when 2001 came along and the possibility of me being diagnosed with breast cancer, I had no doubt that I too was going to join the family party. So in 2001, I found my own lump. After many mammograms, none of them showed a lump, but I felt something. And I went back to my doctor 2 months after having my mammogram. He again did another mammogram, and we had an ultrasound. And then I had a partial mastectomy, also called a lumpectomy. It was an in situ ductal type of carcinoma, which fortunately made it possible for the smaller surgery instead of a massive one. I did go through chemo, I did go through radiation, and I've been on drugs after for tamoxifen and Femara for 10 years following. I worked all through my cancer. I worked through all my treatments at teaching 4th grade. Most people have a difficult time staying with it. I did not want to let cancer beat me, so I let my 4th graders take care of me too. Every day going to school with the wig on. As soon as I got back into the car, I ripped that wig right off. So everything was going along fine and dandy. I participated in all sorts of breast cancer awareness events around Maine as well as in Florida. And then in 2016, I began to notice that the other breast had something going on. I didn't know what the going on was because it was totally different from the first time I had breast cancer. So as soon as I got a chance to, I went and saw my oncologist. We had a mammogram, nothing there. Then he persisted. He went on to have I went on to have an ultrasound. The ultrasound showed that I had a lobular type of breast cancer this time, totally different than the last time. This time there was no easy way out. I had to have the mastectomy. So in 2016-17, I had my mastectomy. All went well with that. I had an implant surgical reconstruction, and then the chemo began again. And the radiation began again. And as I went through all of those treatments, knowing that I had cleared it once before was my hope for clearing it again. And then in 2018, believe it or not, my mom at age 86 was diagnosed with her second bout of breast cancer. She decided at that time to have the mastectomy, but she did not have the chemo and the radiation as she had done the first time. It's really difficult to convince an 86-year-old that she needs to have a mastectomy, but she acquiesced to that as long as she didn't have to do the chemo, she said. So I think about my story having a prologue and a story, and then I hope there's no epilogue, because I'm hoping that 2 times for my mom and 2 times for me and 1 time for my sister, who are all still alive and all still going strong as survivors, is where my story will end, with all of us having a happy ever after. So let me tell you a little bit how I got through my breast cancer. As I mentioned, I was teaching 4th grade at the time of my first diagnosis. And on Friday afternoons, I would leave my class in the well-abled hands of one of my aide teachers, and I would go off for my chemo, and then come back on Monday. And the kids never really knew. As I mentioned before, I was wearing my wig, and they didn't really know much about it. But of course, the rumor had gotten around school. I would encounter many of the teachers, and they would look at me and they would say, "I know that's not your real hair, but you don't have any eyelashes. You don't have any eyebrows." And I would jokingly say, "I don't have any hair in a lot of places." The students never really knew, but the parents did. I had one of those classes that every teacher has had in their career that was just more of a challenge than they needed to be. 32 students sitting in my 4th grade class in Palm Harbor, Florida, didn't have a clue, but I knew. And I knew that I could not leave those kids with a substitute for me to be out sick. The parents also knew. The parents would send me notes of thank yous, thanking me for going to school every day so that I could teach their kids that when you have cancer, you don't have to die. When you have cancer, you don't have to quit living your life. And the parents were really very supportive. Now, on the last day after my chemos were all finished and the hair was starting to grow back, I decided to sit them all down and tell them the story. Why I had left every other Friday to go for some treatment they never knew about. And I told them that I'd been wearing a wig this whole time for school year. They looked at me pretty crazy. So they told me, "That's not a wig." And I said, "Yes, it is." And they said, "Prove it." Well, 10-year-olds need proof. So I put my hand up on top of my head, and I pretended like I was going to pull, like it wouldn't come off, and it wouldn't come off. And then finally, at the very end, I took the wig off. By then, my hair had started to grow back, and they were all in shock and all surprised that I had been through what I'd been through, and they never knew. So that was kind of an exciting thing. The rest of the school year was fabulous after that. Of course, I had a husband, and of course, they needed to protect. And of course, I had cravings for all sorts of things, because as you might know, your mouth starts to feel very weird when you're having all those chemo treatments. I craved banana-flavored items. I wanted banana popsicles. I wanted banana pudding. I wanted banana bread, but I didn't want a banana. Everything had to be banana. At school, the teachers would bring me Tootsie Pops I could tuck on during the day to help get rid of it. One day, one of the teacher aides came in with a giant pickle jar full of Tootsie Pops for me. That's the kind of support that you need, and that's the kind of thing you can't tell someone what you need. They just know what you need. My best friend would bring me sweet tea on the weekends because she knew I had a anchoring for my sweet tea, being a Southern girl. And she'd bring me sweet tea every week. That's the kind of support that you need from your friends, from your family. You can't just depend on you telling them something. They need to be there to do something that helps them go with the cause and help you over your cure. My husband was terrific, but when round 2 came, he freaked out more than I did. He was, "How come you didn't tell me? How come you didn't know? How come you couldn't tell?" Until I could finally find out from the doctor. He was a great support. He's been there for everything, for 45 years of our married life, as well as those years of breast cancer. And I know he's been a big support to men in the area too. He participated in a breast cancer walk with a team called Men with Heart, and all the men had wives, mothers, sisters, any kind of relative who had had breast cancer. So he is a big supporter also. The best kind of support American Cancer Society can give you. There's a group called Reach to Recovery. They help you find ways to meet your needs. There's a place called Look Good, Feel Better. I wasn't a person that wore a lot of makeup, but I didn't realize that it wasn't just about makeup. It's about taking care of yourself, your skin, when you're having chemo and radiation. They helped me through that. Many times, the American Cancer Society has reached out to help continuing. And as a survivor, I get emails from them on a regular basis asking me to tell them, how am I doing? How are you feeling? Where are you going? What can we do for you? So if someone asks you, if you have breast cancer, what can I do for you? It doesn't have to be something big. It can be something as small as a glass of sweet tea.
Thank you very much, Mash. Our next speaker is Beth, and Beth will share with you her story about breast cancer.
Hi, my name is Beth. I live in Damariscotta, Maine, and I'm going to talk about my journey with breast cancer. This happened when I lived in Londonderry, New Hampshire, but I had fallen in love with this area, and there is a connection with this area for this story. We knew the owners of the Mill Pond Inn at that time, and they were a part of our support team as we were getting ready to move here after this journey ended. I was diagnosed with breast cancer on April 1st, 2015. It was April Fool's Day, but no one was laughing. I was at the hospital for an ultrasound follow-up to what I thought was a basic standard mammogram. But I'd never had an ultrasound before, and I was a little concerned, so I brought a friend, my friend Vicky, another important part of my support team. I'm glad she was there because when they told me what they had found, I stopped being able to process any information. She sat with me while I listened to the radiologist and heard the first information, and she remembered things for me, which was really important because by the time I got home, all I heard was breast cancer in big glowing letters. And then I had to face the music and tell my family what was going on, my wonderful husband Andy, my two wonderful kids, Sarah and Matt, and eventually a medical team. By April 7th, I had met some of my medical team. I was very pleased with them. I thought they were smart and compassionate, and I was not discouraged with what they were saying at all because they said, this is going to be easy. You're going to have a lumpectomy. You're going to have some radiation. You'll be done in about 3 or 4 months. But they were wrong. On April 9th, I had an MRI, and I met my medical oncologist, Dr. Brown, very soon after that for just a little bit more information. And I was lucky because on the 14th, so 2 weeks later, I had my lumpectomy. So much happened in those 2 weeks, so many tests, getting so much information, but I still thought I was going to have a lumpectomy, radiation, and skip down the road on my merry way. Sadly, the results from the test of the tumor were not what they expected. The tumor was still a stage 1, a grade 1, but it was almost a stage 2. There were negative margins, but they found some cancer cells around a nerve, and this indicated a potential need for chemotherapy. Now, my support team, I've talked about my family already, and Bob and Sherry up here in Damariscotta, who were on the phone all the time. My girlfriend Vicky, who I mentioned. I have a whole lot of other friends who were there for me. I won't list the names because it's extensive. But they made meals, they called, they sent flowers, they visited, they did everything that I needed them to do. The results of this horrible tumor meant that the doctor wanted to send the tumor sample in for something called oncotype genetic testing. And that is a type of testing that gives you more detail about what your recurrence chances are. You want a number to come out below 14. My number was 28. And that meant that the risk for recurrence without chemotherapy was quite high. So the one thing I had been really afraid of, which was chemotherapy, was now a reality. Fortunately, chemotherapy isn't what it used to be. I know there's bad chemotherapy for other kinds of cancers. For me, I had no nausea whatsoever. I had fatigue. I certainly had what they call chemo brain. If anybody mentions that to you, it's real. You get really stupid for a while. But other than that, it wasn't bad. One of my support team was with me for every single one of my 4 rounds of chemo, which took place over 12 weeks. Other members of my support team were there delivering meals, calling me, supporting me, doing anything and everything I needed. I continued to work. I was a private music teacher. My students' parents would come in bringing me things they knew I liked to eat and drink, and lots of hugs. The one part of chemotherapy that was hard was that I had Neulasta shots, which promote your white blood cells, and they cause a lot of bone pain. And I did lose my hair. After the surgery, I was allowed to have alcohol again and raw foods again, and there will be a picture available of Bobby Ware giving me raw oysters and a drink for the first time in several months. After the surgery, I had 36 days of radiation, which makes you just generally exhausted. And on Saturday, this coming Saturday, I will be 5 years out. And that means I count 5 more years, and then I have the wonderful word cured. This is not horrible. You can survive this. And don't be afraid to ask for help.
Our third speaker is a little different. Jessica had young children at home and had the task of explaining to her children just what was going on with their mommy.
Hello, my name is Jessica, and this is my journey with breast cancer. I was diagnosed just after my 40th birthday last year in 2019. I had noticed some changes in my body and decided I needed to see my doctor. She was also concerned, so she scheduled some tests to be done, an ultrasound as well as an MRI. So we did that, and then I was scheduled to meet with a breast surgeon prior to getting the results. I was nervous and I was scared. It's never a good sign when you know you're going to meet with a surgeon to go over some results. So they had seen some things on my MRI that concerned them. The changes I had noticed were in my left breast, and come to find out they wanted to look at both breasts. So they scheduled appointments for biopsies to be done on both sides at separate times. And the left side was done first, and within 3 days I got my results that I had ductal carcinoma in pseudo in my left breast, which meant I did have cancer cells, but they hadn't started spreading yet. So that was reassuring, but I was going to require some type of surgery. I immediately started doing as much research as I could so that I would be ready to ask a lot of questions and make an informed decision once I had all of the data on the other side. So the following week I went in and had my right side biopsy done, and those results came back quicker, and the surgeon actually called me with those to let me know that my right side, which was not the side that I had even gone in for, was showing that I had invasive carcinoma, invasive ductal carcinoma on that side. So I had been diagnosed with breast cancer in both of my breasts. One was a little bit further along than the other, and I was presented with some options as to what type of treatment I was going to undergo. The option on this side was to go in and have a lumpectomy on both breasts, take out, the portions that they could see. The left side being the ductal carcinoma in pseudo was pretty large, so the surgeon was honest and let me know that, there was going to be a little bit of disfigurement when I was done with my lumpectomy regardless. So I did some research. I looked into the types of cancer that I had. I asked a lot of questions. I reached out to a lot of resources. I have some family and some friends who have actually been in this situation. So I kind of bounced some of that off of them, and the other option was to undergo a bilateral mastectomy or a double mastectomy. And then taking that route, you have other options as far as reconstruction, non-reconstruction, delayed reconstruction. There's so many pieces to the puzzle. So I chose to go the route of having a bilateral mastectomy with immediate reconstruction. For me, the thought of having breast cancer was terrifying. The thought of having my body change at 40 was even worse. I have 3 children. My youngest is 10. I was not ready to have my figure altered and have to go through that deep explanation to a 10-year-old child. I also knew that my mental health after the surgery was going to be just as important as my physical health. And for me and my body image being a big part of, how I feel about myself, I knew that that was a step I needed to take. So after I had all of this ammunition in my head and had decided what I was going to go with, that's when I decided to talk with my family. Up to that point, I kept things under wraps for the most part. There were the select few that I spoke with, the real close people that might have experienced some of these conversations, so I would have their input and information. But for the most part, I didn't really talk to my family. My fiance was with me the whole step of the way, listening to me read information and ask questions and re-ask questions, but for the most part I kept my children and my parents and some of my siblings in the dark. So it came time to have that discussion, and I spoke with my youngest daughter. I was really nervous about how to tell my 10-year-old daughter that I was gonna have surgery for breast cancer. But we had that conversation. We all decided to keep a positive attitude to move forward. I had my surgery in January. I had a second surgery in March, and I am doing great. I feel great. I feel really good about my decision to include all of my children in the journey and let them know not to be afraid. Just because you have a cancer diagnosis does not mean that you need to be afraid. There are a lot of options, and everybody's options are different, and everybody's cancer journey is different. It's going to be what they need to do for themselves, and it's a tough journey to go under, but in the end, you find peace in every step of the way. And I am now approaching my 1-year anniversary, and I'm not looking at it as a negative thing. I'm looking at it as a positive thing. I've made a lot of great changes. I now know what's truly important, and I feel very fulfilled by my journey.
We have one last speaker this evening, and it's me. I was diagnosed earlier this year, in fact, January 2nd, when I went in for a routine mammogram at our fabulous breast care center at Lincoln Health. And I can't say enough about the folks at Lincoln Health. They found something suspicious, but because I'm never home in the course of the day by my variety of volunteer jobs, when I arrived home, there was a message from the folks at the breast care center suggesting that I need to call them right back. It was after hours. I called first thing in the morning. I was hurried right back in for some additional testing and followed by a sonogram. The conclusion was clear, and they set about the business of scheduling me to go to the Scarborough Breast Care Center down at Maine Med. What a wonderful operation. I tell you, the care for breast cancer patients in this state is truly unmatched. The caring, personal, competent attention is amazing. Anyway, next up, you have a biopsy, which is like being put on a rack. Let me tell you, and any woman who's had one will agree. It's funny just to show you how perfect and how imperfect the process is. Initially, I was diagnosed with what the surgeon called a buckshot of breast cancer, leaving no alternative but a mastectomy. So I began making plans for a double mastectomy. Seemed like the only sensible thing to do, to get it all done at once. I went through 6 weeks planning for that. And finally, the surgeon decided there needed to be one last test. And that last test revealed that the buckshot of cancer was in fact only a buckshot of calcium. Just goes to show how complicated the diagnosis can be. Many women have very dense breasts, many women have very calcified breasts. I fall into the latter category. And so I was grateful. The song and dance, it was going to be a lumpectomy, even though it really wasn't a lump, it was a mass of tissue. On to Maine Med. Luckily, I had my surgery the week before COVID hit, so I was actually able to go into the breast care center down in Scarborough and have my surgery. My surgeon was an artist. The surgery went very well. The follow-up was extraordinary. I went through 6.5 weeks of daily radiation. I'm sure you've all heard the tales of radiation. I was extremely fortunate. I had absolutely no side effects other than the fact that I got fried, and they do a pretty good job of frying. But the radiation people give you all kinds of tips on how to treat that, as do other survivors who rise from the woodwork. I still wear the bracelet that was given to me the very week I was diagnosed by a friend and a survivor, which I've never taken off since the day she gave it to me. So I went through radiation very well, and next was the follow-up treatment. They did genomic testing, they did of my tissue, they did the full genetic testing to see if I carried the BRCA genes, and the decision was made not to have traditional chemo, even though it was found in my lymph nodes, which is a bad thing. And I'm now taking an oral treatment. I'm just into it. I'm 9 months into breast cancer, so you don't want to take much advice from me because I'm still learning. I do hate the medication I'm on now. It makes every joint in my body hurt, but I'm alive and here talking to you, and I'm grateful for it. I see my radiologist regularly, follow up with the, did I say radiologist? No, I see my oncologist regularly and my radiologist periodically. And the next big step will be the first mammogram, which will come in January. So I have my fingers crossed. Again, let me speak to the population of survivors that rise to meet you, people you never knew had breast cancer, here that you do, and they're there to support you. It's an amazing community, an amazing group of women in this town who have survived breast cancer. I intend to be one of them, and so I'll keep you posted. With that, I want to thank you all for joining us this evening for this session, hearing the stories of all the survivors. And moreover, I'd like to thank you for joining us this week. We at LCTV are so proud to have been able to bring this series of 5 shows to the community. We tried to touch on all the important aspects, from research and education to treatment to survivors. We hope you've enjoyed it. We hope you've learned a lot, and hope you don't have to experience it yourself. With that, good evening and thank you.